The morning sun barely peeked through the dirty windows of Rivera Aircraft Repair when Tony stepped inside his small garage. The smell of motor oil and old metal filled the air, just like it had for the past 25 years when his father first opened this place. But now everything felt different. Everything felt wrong. Tony walked slowly to his father's old desk in the corner. Papers were scattered everywhere: bills, overdue notices, and letters from the bank. He picked up the red envelope that arrived yesterday and read it again, even though he already knew what it said. The bank wanted their money in 30 days, or they would take the garage. Take everything his father had worked for his whole life. Sat down in the creaky chair and rubbed his tired eyes. At 28 years old, Tony never thought he would be in this situation. When his dad passed away 2 years ago, everyone said he was lucky to inherit such a successful business. But they didn't know about the hidden debts. They didn't know about the medical bills from his father's long illness. They didn't know how hard it was to keep customers when bigger companies offered cheaper services. The garage felt too quiet. Tony remembered when he was a kid. This place was always busy. His father would be working on 3 different planes at once, with customers calling every hour. The sound of engines, the voices of pilots, the constant buzz of a thriving business. All of that was gone now. Tony got up and walked around the empty space. His footsteps echoed in the silence. 3 work bays that used to be full now sat empty. The expensive tools his father bought were still here, but what good were tools without work? He looked at the old photographs on the wall. Pictures of his dad fixing famous people's planes, newspaper articles about Rivera Aircraft Repair being the best in the state, awards from aviation organizations. His phone buzzed on the desk, making him jump. For a second, his heart lifted. Maybe it was a customer, but when he checked, it was just another bill collector. Tony turned the phone off and shoved it in his pocket. Walking to the small bathroom in the back, Tony splashed cold water on his face and looked in the cracked mirror. The man staring back looked older than 28. Dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights. Hands permanently stained with grease and oil. His father's old work shirt hanging loose on his thin frame because he'd been too worried to eat properly for months. He remembered the conversation with his girlfriend Lisa last week. She'd tried to be supportive, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. "Maybe you should just get a regular job," she had said quietly. "There's no shame in working for someone else." But Tony knew his father would roll over in his grave if he sold the family business to work for one of those big corporate repair shops. Back at the desk, Tony opened his laptop and checked his bank account. The number made his stomach turn. After paying for basic utilities and buying the cheapest food possible, he had exactly $43 left. Not enough to buy the parts he needed for the one small job he had scheduled next week. Not enough to pay even the smallest of his bills. He opened the drawer where his father kept important papers. Inside was the original deed to the property, signed in his father's careful handwriting 25 years ago. There were old contracts with major airlines back when Rivera Aircraft Repair was their go-to shop for emergency fixes. There were thank you letters from grateful pilots who said Tony's father had saved their lives with his quick thinking and expert repairs. Tony held up one letter that always made him smile, even on his worst days. It was from a military pilot, whose helicopter had emergency landed during a storm. Tony's father had worked all night in the rain to fix the engine, refusing to stop even when lightning was striking nearby. The pilot wrote that he got home to see his newborn daughter because of that repair. That was the kind of mechanic his father was, the kind of person who put others before himself. But being a good person didn't pay the bills. Being skilled didn't matter if nobody called. Tony had all of his father's knowledge, plus additional training in modern aircraft systems. He could fix engines that other mechanics couldn't even understand. But none of that mattered if the phone didn't ring. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. It was already 10 in the morning, and Tony hadn't had a single call. He used to get at least 5 or 6 calls by this time, even on slow days. Now, whole weeks went by without the phone ringing once. Tony walked outside and looked at the small parking lot. Weeds were growing through cracks in the concrete. The sign that said Rivera Aircraft Repair, family-owned since 1999, was faded and needed painting. Everything about the place looked tired and forgotten. A fancy car drove by slowly, and for a moment Tony thought it might be a customer. But it kept going, probably heading to Mitchell Aviation down the road. Mitchell had bought out 3 smaller shops in the past year and was taking all the business with their low prices and fast marketing. Going back inside, Tony sat down and pulled out a yellow legal pad. He started writing down his options, just like his father taught him to do when facing a big problem. Option 1. Sell everything and pay off the debts, then look for a job working for someone else. Option 2. Try to get another loan, though the bank had already said no twice. Option 3. Close the business and declare bankruptcy, losing everything but starting fresh. None of the options felt right. Each one meant giving up on his father's dream. Each one meant admitting defeat. Tony's stomach growled, reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast again to save money. He opened the small refrigerator in the corner, just a bottle of water and half a sandwich from 2 days ago. He ate the stale sandwich anyway, tasting more disappointment than food. The afternoon dragged by with no calls, no customers, no hope. Tony tried to stay busy by organizing tools and cleaning equipment, but everything was already clean and organized. He was just moving things around to avoid thinking about his problems. As the sun started to set, Tony made a decision that broke his heart. Tomorrow he would call a real estate agent and put the property up for sale. He would pay off what he could and try to start over somewhere else, doing something else. The dream of Rivera Aircraft Repair would die with him, just like his father's legacy. He was locking up for the night when his phone rang. Tony almost didn't answer it, expecting another bill collector. But something made him pick up on the 4th ring. The voice on the other end was frantic, desperate, talking about an emergency at the airfield across town. They needed a mechanic immediately and nobody else was available. Tony hesitated for just a moment. He barely had enough gas money to get there, and he didn't even know if they would pay him. But something in the caller's voice reminded him of all the emergencies his father had responded to over the years. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe this was his last chance to prove that Rivera Aircraft Repair still mattered. Without thinking too much about it, Tony grabbed his toolbox and headed for his old truck. As he drove toward the airfield, he had no idea that this emergency call would change his entire life forever. Tony's old pickup truck coughed and wheezed as he pulled into Westfield Private Airfield. The place was nothing like the small public airport where he usually worked. Everything here screamed money, from the perfectly maintained runways to the gleaming hangars that looked like they belonged in a magazine. As he parked near the main terminal, Tony could see a crowd of people gathered around something on the tarmac. Even from a distance, he could tell they weren't happy. People were pacing back and forth, talking loudly on their phones and pointing at whatever had their attention. Tony grabbed his heavy toolbox from the truck bed and walked toward the group. That's when he saw it, the most beautiful aircraft he had ever laid eyes on. It was a Gulfstream G650, painted in deep blue with silver stripes. The kind of plane that cost more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. But despite its beauty, the plane sat completely still and silent on the runway. A man in an expensive suit rushed over to Tony as soon as he spotted the toolbox. "Are you the mechanic? Thank God you're here. We've been waiting for hours." Tony nodded, trying not to feel intimidated by all the wealth surrounding him. "What's the problem?" The man who introduced himself as David explained the situation quickly. "The engines won't start. We've had 3 different mechanics look at it already. 2 from the airport's regular crew and 1 specialist they flew in from the city. Nobody can figure out what's wrong." As David talked, Tony's eyes moved to a woman standing near the aircraft's stairs. Even from 30 feet away, he could tell she was different from everyone else here. While the other passengers looked frustrated and angry, she appeared calm and focused. She was talking quietly on her phone, but her eyes kept moving to the plane's engines like she was trying to solve the problem herself. "Who's the owner?" Tony asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Catherine Rodriguez," David said, lowering his voice with respect. She's the CEO of Quantum Innovations. You know, the tech company that's been in all the news lately. She's supposed to be in Tokyo tomorrow morning for the biggest business deal of her career. If she doesn't make that meeting, the whole thing falls apart. We're talking about billions of dollars here. Tony felt his stomach tighten. No pressure at all. Just fix a multi-million-dollar aircraft for one of the most successful businesswomen in the country, with billions of dollars hanging in the balance. He took a deep breath and walked closer to the plane. The other mechanics were packing up their equipment, shaking their heads in defeat. One of them, an older man with grease under his fingernails, stopped when he saw Tony approaching. "Don't waste your time, kid," the mechanic said. "We've tried everything. The fuel system's all messed up, but we can't find the source. It's gonna need a complete overhaul, probably take a week minimum. Maybe 2. Tony thanked the man but didn't let his words discourage him. His father had always taught him that other people's limitations didn't have to become his own. Every problem had a solution. You just had to be willing to look hard enough to find it. As the other mechanics left, Tony set his toolbox down near the aircraft and began his own inspection. He could feel eyes watching him from the small crowd of passengers and crew members. Some looked hopeful, others seemed skeptical that this unknown mechanic could succeed where others had failed. Catherine finished her phone call and walked over to where Tony was working. Up close, he could see the stress in her eyes, though she tried to hide it behind a professional smile. "I'm Catherine," she said, extending her hand. "I understand you're here to take a look at our problem." Tony wiped his greasy hand on his shirt before shaking hers. "Tony Rivera, ma'am. I'll do my best to get you back in the air." The other mechanic said it could take a week or more, Catherine said, watching his face carefully. "Is that your assessment too?" Tony looked at the massive engines and then back at her. "I haven't started my diagnosis yet, ma'am. Let me take a proper look before I make any promises." Catherine nodded, and Tony could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe respect for his honesty, or maybe just hope that someone might actually help her. As Tony began opening access panels and checking systems, he became aware of conversations happening around him. Catherine was on another phone call, this time speaking what sounded like Japanese. From what he could understand, she was trying to delay the Tokyo meeting, but it wasn't going well. David was talking to someone about charter planes, but apparently, every aircraft capable of making the Trans-Pacific flight was already booked or unavailable on such short notice. The frustration in his voice grew with each phone call. Other passengers, Tony counted 6 of them, were making their own arrangements. Some were rebooking commercial flights. Others were calling their families to explain why they wouldn't be home as planned. Everyone's life was being disrupted by this one broken airplane. Tony tried to block out the noise and focus on the problem. He pulled out his father's old diagnostic tools, equipment that looked ancient compared to the high-tech gadgets the other mechanics had been using. But his father had always said that sometimes the simplest tools worked best, especially when you knew how to use them properly. The fuel system was indeed malfunctioning, just as the other mechanics had said. But as Tony traced the lines and checked the connections, he started to get a feeling, the same kind of intuition his father had taught him to trust. Something about this problem felt familiar, like an echo of something he had seen before. While he worked, Tony became aware that Catherine had stopped making phone calls and was watching him closely. She didn't hover or ask annoying questions like some customers did. Instead, she observed quietly, and Tony got the impression that she was studying not just what he was doing, but how he was doing it. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and Tony knew that time was running out. If he couldn't figure this out soon, Catherine would miss her meeting and lose her deal. But more than that, Tony would go home to his empty garage with the same problems he had started with. No money, no prospects, and no hope. As he worked deeper into the engine compartment, Tony's mind went back to a repair he had helped his father with years ago. It was a different type of aircraft, but the symptoms had been similar. His father had spent hours looking in all the obvious places before finally discovering the real problem hidden in an unexpected location. Tony paused his work and closed his eyes, trying to remember exactly what his father had found that day. The other mechanics had focused on the main fuel pumps and filters just like everyone always did. But what if the problem was somewhere else entirely? What if it was something so small and hidden that most people would never think to look there? Opening his eyes with renewed determination, Tony reached for a different tool and started checking a part of the system that the other mechanics had probably ignored completely. As his flashlight illuminated a tiny component deep in the engine housing, Tony's heart began to race. There it was, so small he almost missed it, but definitely there. A hairline crack in a fuel manifold that was causing the entire system to malfunction. It was exactly the kind of problem his father had taught him to look for, the kind that could hide from expensive diagnostic equipment, but couldn't hide from an experienced eye and a determined heart. Tony smiled for the first time all day. He had found the problem. Now he just had to figure out how to fix it before the sun went down and Catherine's last chance disappeared forever. Tony stared at the tiny crack in the fuel manifold, his heart pounding with both excitement and fear. Finding the problem was only half the battle. Now he had to fix it. And this wasn't going to be easy. The crack was barely visible, thinner than a human hair, but it was causing fuel to leak in just the right way to confuse all the engine sensors. The computer systems thought there was plenty of fuel, but the engines weren't getting what they needed to start. It was like having a tiny hole in a garden hose, small enough to miss, but big enough to ruin everything. Tony wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky orange and red. Most of the airport workers had gone home for the day, leaving just Catherine, her team, and Tony alone on the quiet tarmac. He climbed down from the engine compartment and walked over to where Catherine was standing. She looked up from her phone with hope in her eyes. "I found the problem," Tony said simply. Catherine's entire team stopped what they were doing and gathered around. David, the man in the expensive suit, spoke first. "Can you fix it? How long will it take?" Tony chose his words carefully. "It's a cracked fuel manifold. Very small, very hard to see. That's why the other mechanics missed it. The good news is that I can fix it. The bad news is that it's going to take some creative thinking." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked, her voice steady despite the stress Tony could see in her face. "This part isn't something you can just order from a parts catalog," Tony explained. "It's custom made for this specific engine model. Normally, you'd have to order a replacement from the manufacturer, which would take weeks." The disappointment on everyone's faces was immediate and crushing. David threw his hands up in frustration. "So we're back to square one. We found the problem but can't fix it." But Tony held up his hand. "I said normally. But my father taught me that sometimes normal isn't good enough. Sometimes you have to think like a problem solver, not just a parts replacer." Catherine stepped closer, and Tony could see she was hanging on his every word. "What are you thinking?" "I can make a temporary repair," Tony said. "It won't be pretty, and it won't last forever, but it should hold long enough to get you to Tokyo and back. Maybe longer if you're careful." "Is it safe?" Catherine asked immediately. Tony appreciated that her first concern was safety, not just getting to her meeting. "If I do it right, absolutely," Tony said. "My father used to do emergency repairs like this during the war, when getting new parts wasn't an option. The technique is solid, but it requires some old-school methods that most modern mechanics never learned." Catherine looked at her watch, then at the sunset, then back at Tony. "How long do you need?" "Give me 4 hours," Tony said. "Maybe 5. I'll work through the night if I have to." Catherine nodded without hesitation. "Do it." Tony returned to his toolbox and pulled out equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. Some of the tools had been his grandfather's, passed down through 3 generations of Rivera mechanics. David watched with obvious skepticism as Tony laid out files, small hammers and metalworking tools that seemed ancient compared to the high-tech airplane. "Are you sure about this?" David whispered to Catherine, loud enough for Tony to hear. Catherine looked at Tony for a long moment, studying his face. "He found the problem when nobody else could. I trust him to fix it too." Those words hit Tony, harder than he expected. When was the last time someone had said they trusted him? When was the last time anyone had believed in his abilities without question? He felt a surge of determination that reminded him of working alongside his father as a teenager. Tony climbed back into the engine compartment and got to work. The space was cramped and awkward, forcing him to work with his arms stretched above, his head while lying on his back. Within an hour, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his arms ached from the uncomfortable position. The first step was to carefully clean the cracked area without making the damage worse. Tony used tools so small they looked like dental instruments, scraping away years of built-up residue to expose the crack clearly. Every movement had to be precise. One slip could turn a small problem into a massive disaster. As he worked, Tony became aware of activity around the aircraft. Catherine had ordered dinner for everyone from a nearby restaurant. She made sure Tony got a plate too, even though he was too focused to eat much. Her team set up a work area with portable lights, so Tony could see clearly as darkness fell. "You don't have to stay," Tony called down to Catherine during a brief break. "This is going to take most of the night." "We're not going anywhere," Catherine replied firmly. "This is my aircraft and my responsibility." Tony was touched by her loyalty, but also felt the pressure of having an audience. Every move he made was being watched by people who had billions of dollars riding on his success. The actual repair required a technique his father had called cold welding, using pressure and precise metalwork to create a seal without heat. That might damage the surrounding components. Tony had only done this type of repair twice before, both times under his father's guidance. Working by the light of portable lamps, Tony carefully prepared a tiny piece of specialized metal that would serve as a patch. The piece had to be shaped exactly right. Too big and it would interfere with fuel flow. Too small and it wouldn't seal the crack completely. Hours passed. Tony's hands cramped from the delicate work, and his neck ached from the awkward position. Several times he had to stop and rest, worried that fatigue might cause him to make a mistake. During these breaks, he would find Catherine nearby, not hovering or asking annoying questions, but simply present and supportive. Around midnight, Tony reached the most critical part of the repair. The metal patch had to be positioned perfectly, and then secured using a technique that required both strength and finesse. There would be no second chances. If he messed this up, the entire fuel manifold would need to be replaced, which was impossible without ordering parts. Tony took a deep breath and began the final steps. Using tools that were older than he was, he carefully positioned the patch and began the delicate process of securing it in place. His hands moved with the precision his father had taught him, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought might fail. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Tony made the final adjustment and sat back to examine his work. The patch was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, and the seal appeared perfect. But the real test would come when they tried to start the engines. Tony climbed down from the engine compartment, exhausted but hopeful. Catherine and her team had been waiting patiently, and they all looked at him expectantly. "It's done," Tony said simply. "But we won't know if it worked until we test it." Catherine nodded to her pilots, who had been standing by all night. They climbed into the cockpit and began their pre-flight checks. Tony held his breath as they went through the startup sequence, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether his repair had worked or failed. The first engine coughed once, then roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. The second engine followed immediately, both running smooth and strong. The pilots ran through their diagnostic checks, and after several tense minutes, one of them gave a thumbs up from the cockpit window. Tony felt his knees go weak with relief. The repair had worked. Catherine would make her meeting, her deal would go through, and Tony had proven that Rivera Aircraft Repair still had something valuable to offer the world. But as he packed up his tools, Tony had no idea that this successful repair was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. As the engines hummed smoothly on the tarmac, Tony began packing his tools with shaking hands. The relief was overwhelming. He had actually done it. The repair that 3 other mechanics said was impossible had taken him most of the night, but it was finished. He was closing his toolbox when he heard footsteps approaching. Catherine walked over, no longer the stressed businesswoman he had met hours earlier. There was something different in her expression now. a mixture of gratitude and curiosity that made Tony feel suddenly self-conscious about his grease-stained clothes and tired appearance. "That was incredible," Catherine said quietly. "I watched. You work for 8 hours straight. I've never seen anything like it." Tony shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "No," Catherine said firmly. "That wasn't just a job, that was artistry. The way you approached that problem, the patience you showed, the techniques you used. Where did you learn to work like that?" For the first time since arriving at the airport, Tony smiled genuinely. "My father. He taught me everything I know. Said that being a mechanic wasn't about having the newest tools or the fanciest equipment. It was about understanding how things work and caring enough to fix them right." Catherine nodded slowly, and Tony could see she was processing something in her mind. "Tell me about your father." So Tony did. Standing there beside the aircraft with the engines providing a steady background hum, he found himself talking about his dad in a way he hadn't done since the funeral. He told Catherine about the old garage, about the lessons learned while handing his father tools as a boy, about the pride his dad took in every repair, no matter how small. "He always said that every machine has a story," Tony explained. "If you listen carefully enough, it will tell you what's wrong and how to fix it. The trick is learning how to listen." Catherine listened intently, asking questions that showed she understood what Tony was really talking about. She wasn't just being polite. She was genuinely interested in his perspective and his methods. "What about you?" Catherine asked eventually. "Do you have your own shop?" Tony's smile faded as reality came crashing back. I do. Rivera Aircraft Repair, but..." He hesitated, not sure why he was sharing so much with a stranger. "But what?" Catherine prompted gently. "It's not going well," Tony admitted. "Business has been slow since Dad passed. I've got bills piling up, the bank breathing down my neck. Truth is, I was planning to close everything down tomorrow and look for work somewhere else." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying Tony's face in the dim light from the aircraft. "How long have you been struggling?" "About 2 years now," Tony said, surprised by his own honesty. "I kept thinking things would turn around, that I'd find a way to make it work. But I guess wanting something isn't enough." "Show me your hands," Catherine said unexpectedly. Tony looked at her confused but held out his hands. They were rough and scarred from years of working with metal and machinery. Permanent stains from oil and grease marked his fingers and palms. Catherine examined his hands like she was reading a book. "These are the hands of someone who's been working since he was young, someone who's learned to feel what's wrong with a machine just by touching it, someone who cares enough about his work to do it right even when nobody's watching." Tony felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're getting at." Catherine looked up at him with an expression that was both serious and excited. "I'm getting at the fact that you just saved my company $15 billion. Do you understand that? This deal I'm flying to Tokyo for, if I miss it, I lose everything I've worked for my entire career." "I was just doing what anyone would do," Tony protested. "No," Catherine said firmly. "Anyone else would have looked at that engine for an hour, declared it unfixable, and gone home. You stayed here all night, used techniques that most mechanics have never heard of, and solved a problem that stumped everyone else. That's not something anyone can do." Tony didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to this kind of praise, especially from someone as successful as Catherine. "Tell me about your certifications," Catherine continued. "What training do you have?" Tony listed his qualifications, surprised when Catherine's eyebrows rose higher with each credential he mentioned. Commercial aviation maintenance, helicopter, repair, vintage aircraft restoration, emergency field repairs. Over the years, he had accumulated knowledge and certifications that many mechanics never bothered to pursue. "And languages?" Catherine asked. "Spanish and English fluently," Tony said. "Some Portuguese and a little French. My dad always said aviation was international, so mechanics should be too." Catherine nodded, and Tony could practically see her mind working. "Have you ever thought about working for a larger company? Someone who could appreciate your skills and give you the resources to really use them?" Tony laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've applied to every aviation company within 100 miles. They all want people with college degrees and experience with the latest computer systems. Old-school mechanical skills aren't what they're looking for anymore. That's because they don't know what they're missing, Catherine said. The aviation industry has become so focused on technology that they've forgotten the importance of real mechanical understanding. But I haven't forgotten. She paused, looking out at the horizon where the first hints of dawn were beginning to show. I've been looking for someone like you for a long time, Tony. Someone who understands that machines aren't just computers with moving parts. Someone who can think creatively when standard solutions don't work. Tony felt a strange flutter in his chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that Quantum Innovations is expanding into aviation services. We're going to need someone to head up our maintenance division. Someone who can handle not just routine repairs, but the kind of complex problems that stump everyone else. Tony stared at her. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a lot, more than a job, Catherine said. I'm offering you a chance to build something new, to take your father's legacy and expand it in ways he never could have imagined. Before Tony could respond, Catherine's assistant David approached with a tablet. The pilots are ready for departure, Catherine. We need to leave now if we're going to make the Tokyo meeting. Catherine nodded but didn't take her eyes off Tony. I have to go, but this conversation isn't over. Here's my card. Call me tomorrow, today actually, and we'll talk details. She handed Tony a business card, then did something that surprised him. She shook his hand again, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she said simply. You saved more than just my aircraft tonight. You saved my company. As Catherine walked toward the aircraft stairs, Tony stood frozen, holding the business card like it might disappear if he moved too quickly. The engines grew louder as the pilots prepared for takeoff, and within minutes the beautiful Gulfstream was rolling down the runway and lifting into the pre-dawn sky. Tony watched until the aircraft's lights disappeared into the darkness, then looked down at the card in his hand. Catherine Rodriguez, CEO, Quantum Innovations. Below her name was a phone number and an email address. As he walked back to his old pickup truck, Tony's mind raced with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. Just 12 hours ago, he had been ready to give up on everything. Now he was holding what might be the key to a completely different future. He started the truck and began the drive back to his empty garage. But for the first time in 2 years, Tony Rivera wasn't thinking about closing down Rivera Aircraft Repair. Instead, he was wondering what it might be like to build something even bigger than his father had ever dreamed possible. 3 days later, Tony was sitting in his quiet garage staring at Catherine's business card for the 100th time. He had called her office twice, but each time he hung up before anyone answered. What was he supposed to say? How do you call one of the most successful people in the country and ask about a job offer that might have been made in the heat of the moment? His phone rang, making him jump. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer anyway. Tony Rivera speaking. Tony, it's Catherine. I was wondering why you hadn't called me yet. Tony's heart started racing. I wasn't sure if you were serious about the job offer. It's been a crazy few days and I thought maybe you might have changed your mind. Catherine laughed and Tony could hear the sound of jet engines in the background. I'm calling you from 30,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, Tony. The deal in Tokyo went perfectly, by the way. Your repair held beautifully for the entire flight. That's great news, Tony said, genuinely relieved. I've been thinking about our conversation nonstop, Catherine continued. In fact, I've been making some calls. I know about Rivera Aircraft Repair now. I know about your father's reputation, about the work you've been doing to keep the business alive, and about the financial problems you're facing. Tony felt his stomach drop. Ma'am, I didn't tell you those things to make you feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for you, Tony. I feel impressed. Do you know what I learned when I had my people research your background? In the past 2 years, despite having almost no marketing budget and barely any customers, you've maintained a 100% success rate on every repair you've attempted. Every single customer has left satisfied. Tony didn't know what to say to that. I also learned that you've been turning down job offers from my competitors because you didn't want to abandon your father's legacy. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Catherine, I appreciate the kind words, but I'm not finished. Catherine interrupted gently. I'm landing in Los Angeles in 6 hours. I want you to meet me at Westfield Airport, tonight. There's something I need to show you. Tony agreed, though he had no idea what to expect. He spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning up the garage and trying not to get his hopes up too high. Job offers that sounded too good to be true usually were. That evening, Tony arrived at Westfield Airport to find Catherine waiting for him, in the same spot where they had first met. But this time she wasn't stressed or rushed. She looked calm and confident, like someone who had made an important decision. "Thank you for coming," she said, walking over to greet him. "I want to show you something." She led him across the tarmac to a large hangar that Tony had never paid attention to before. Catherine typed a code into a keypad, and the massive doors began to slide open. Inside, Tony's jaw dropped. The hangar contained not one aircraft, but 7. Everything from small business jets to larger planes that could carry dozens of passengers. Some looked brand new. Others appeared to be vintage models that had been lovingly restored. "This is Quantum Aviation," Catherine said, watching Tony's amazed expression. "It's a division of my company that I started 6 months ago. The idea is to provide premium aviation services to companies and individuals who need more than just standard airline travel." Tony walked slowly through the hangar, looking at each aircraft. They were all beautiful, but he could see that some needed work. Not major repairs, but the kind of detailed maintenance that kept aircraft running at peak performance. "Right now, I'm contracting all my maintenance work to outside companies," Catherine continued. "But I'm not happy with the quality. These planes deserve better care than they're getting." Tony stopped in front of a vintage 1960s aircraft that had been restored to showroom condition. "This is incredible work," he said, running his hand along the polished wing. "Whoever restored this really knew what they were doing." "That's the problem," Catherine said. "Finding people who really know what they're doing. Most modern mechanics can run diagnostics and replace parts, but they don't understand the soul of these machines the way your father did. The way you do." Tony turned to face her, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. "I want you to run this operation, Tony. All of it. You'd be the director of aviation operations for Quantum Aviation. You'd have a team of mechanics working under you, unlimited budget for tools and equipment, and complete authority over how maintenance gets done." Tony felt dizzy. "Catherine, that sounds amazing, but I don't have experience managing a team this size. I've never run anything bigger than my dad's small shop." "But you know quality when you see it," Catherine said. "And you know how to solve problems that other people can't solve. Those are the skills I need most." She led him to a small office, in the corner of the hangar. "This would be your office, and before you ask about salary, here's what I'm thinking." Catherine handed him a piece of paper with a number written on it. Tony stared at the figure, certain he was reading it wrong. It was more money than he had made in the past 3 years combined. "That's just the starting salary," Catherine said, "plus equity in the aviation division, plus a budget to expand Rivera Aircraft Repair into a full-service operation. You could keep your father's business alive and growing while building something new at the same time." Tony sat down heavily in the office chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Catherine was offering. "This is too much. I don't understand why you're doing this." Catherine sat down across from him, her expression serious. "Can I tell you something personal, Tony?" Tony nodded. "I've been successful in business because I'm good at recognizing talent, but I've been less successful in my personal life because I've never found someone who shares my values. Someone who understands that real success isn't just about making money, it's about doing work that matters." Tony looked up at her, surprised by the personal direction the conversation had taken. "When I watched you work on my plane that night, I saw something I've been looking for my whole life. I saw someone who cares about excellence for its own sake. Someone who takes pride in doing things right, even when nobody's watching. Someone who honors the people who came before him while building something for the future." Catherine paused, and Tony could see that she was choosing her words carefully. "I'm not just offering you a job, Tony, I'm offering you a partnership. In business, yes, but maybe in life too if you're interested." Tony stared at her, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Catherine smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked nervous. "I'm saying that I'd like to get to know you better. I'm saying that I think we could build something amazing together, both professionally and personally. And I'm saying that if you're open to it, I'd like to find out where this connection between us might lead." Tony looked around the hangar, at the aircraft that could be his responsibility, at the office that could be his workspace, at the woman who was offering him not just a job, but a completely new life. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Catherine said simply. "Say yes to the job, say yes to the partnership, and say yes to giving us a chance to see what we might build together." Tony thought about his father, about the lessons he had learned in that small garage, about the dreams that had seemed impossible just a week ago. Then he looked at Catherine, at the hope and excitement in her eyes, and realized that some opportunities only come once in a lifetime. "Yes," he said, and felt his entire world change with that single word. Outside the hangar, the airport was quiet except for the distant sound of aircraft engines, carrying other people to their own destinations and dreams. But inside, two people, who had found each other in the most unexpected way, were beginning to plan a future that neither of them could have imagined just days before.